The immersion in the music language, it's like in the mother tongue. Firstly, phonetic. And the music of the language is a mnemotechnic term of endearment before it becomes a phoneme that conveys a meaning, or double or several meanings, which come with the grammar, syntax, awareness, when you can read and write on your own the language in which you grew up by osmosis, since it was first through the ear, therefore phonetically spoken. And the innate in music language predisposition for musicians who are sensitive peculiarly to some intervals or tones or modes, major, minor, or half one or half the other, they don't know how to name them because you're not born naming the grammatical rules. But you understand the logic, or sometimes because of lack of logic, you understand the rule by the exception that you make in order to break it because you understood it. In other words, all this is a cerebral construction that happens once you already speak your mother tongue without even making an effort for, unlike when you learn a foreign language, and the vocabulary and the syntax and the conjugation and the choice of this adjective versus the other has a connotation that is not the same, and the nuances and the intrications. All these things are the literary quality of choice of words that can be from the banal I love you with a term of endearment or just a fact of loving something, to meaning it. And I find that a altered degree in a tonal system like flat 2, the Neapolitan sixth in first inversion, or the German sixth tension of the augmented sixth, or with a triton inside, the French sixth as they call him in America. Or the diminished seventh, which are the intertwined two tetrachords that create such tension that needs a resolution. Therefore, it's a longing that becomes anxiety, and if you add syncopation to it, you psychologically suggest in the music language without syllables what state of mood you're in, but the nuancing of how much or not enough you overstate it by your own playing, or you stay in distance and you, as a craftsman, place the words in a certain order as they're written on the score, because the music score is pitches and rhythms. But you still have in between the beats, you have the rubato, the possible delay of a note, or a rhetorical, eloquent quality of expression for a specific climax tone. Doesn't have to be the highest in the melody, can be a question of a leap, how distant it is, an octave, a tenth, a sixth, major or minor, a fifth, always perfect, therefore not major nor minor, or a fourth is an inversion of the fifth, and the third is an inversion to the sixth. So there are innuendos in the gestures that you use in non-verbal music, instrumental, and music that doesn't reproduce sounds of nature or some specific program music, but just the organization or the conversation of the voice parts among themselves. Layered or chordal, depends of the genre, but generally speaking, when one studies a piece, it's already written. To play it, or to analyze it, or to eventually play it. Lipati used to say that he memorizes on the table and starts practicing from memory. Others learn the notes vertically, how the hands fit, beat by beat, bar by bar, basically syllabically, as a spelling bee competition for those who remember high school years. And of course, if you put them together one after the other, you get a sentence with spelling the letters into syllables, into words, into phrases, sentences, and then punctuations that reach also multiplied a paragraph, a page or more, page before the paragraph, eventually, most likely, etc. So the phrasing is not just the group of bars that the composer chose the notation to be in 2, 4, 3, 4, 6, 8. It's a salami slice for practicality of rehearsal by saying we're going to pick up here instead of the 128th beat. It's always 2 or 3 or 4 beats or 5 or 6 beats in a bar. Then they can be subdivided in 2 or 3 if it's 6, 8 or if it's 4, 4. But the point is that the phrasing of the phrase of a melodic line, the expression of the compositional statement of the narrative capacity without lyrics to convey a certain projected phrase arch, then it usually goes on 4-bar structure or 8-bar structure into hypermeter. But because the music is pre-cooked at the notation, translating the intent of the composer through a publisher, the performer who learns it basically learns it phonetically, syllabically, and tries to put it in their muscular memory so that they can react to it when there are so many things to manage at the same time. The brain cannot process too many actions at the same time in terms of the finger independence or articulation. One finger group plays legato, one plays staccato, one plays louder or softer. Then you have the pedal to coordinate harmonically or melodically and to dosage the coating of the expression through the pedal without drowning it in the resonance. And then the choice of fingerings and how you're going to manage a melodic line if you have to play an accompaniment in the same hand. You have to use substitutions, which destabilizes the balance of the hand. So you have to work on strengthening the palm and freeing the wrist. In other words, when there is a will, there is a way. And the teacher is to provide this way according to the aesthetic that they want to bring, how slow the decay of the sound for a slow tempo can connect before the decay reaches under the next note, which then becomes an unexpected, unintended accent. And then take in account the decay of the resonance of the instrument with the acoustic, according to the mood and the tempo indication, which is mostly not written for the modern instrument because it's sometimes 2 or 3 centuries before. But still has to have a coherent meaning, and not only, but also an emotional outpour of what it means to you to tell that sentence, which is not your sentence, but becomes your sentence during the ephemeral moment of your performance where you're the vibrating hyphen between the audience and the piece, which you received in the first place from a score and then recordings of others, how they heard it and played it, comparing it and what the teacher suggests to do, how to approach it, how to think it, how to count it, how to phrase it, how to imagine imaginary lyrics on it. And so when you hear people who play music, sometimes they separate the technical aspect of the synergy of the in fact, the very material fact of playing it with the fingers, to display the fingers in the right spots with the right dynamic range. It's already a lot. But then to make a meaningful sense that suggests a phrase that can be with longing or anticipation, with delay if it's a suspension or an appoggiatura, a tension and a release, the dissonance and the consonance, which concepts evolve through stylistic 18th, 17th before, and of course 19th century after. And is the tension release a diminuendo? Is the tension release sometimes a crescendo in order to bridge further and carry through the arched phrase the diminuendo later? These are analytical aspects of the statement. But ultimately, you have to have a harmonic knowledge, layered, if not contrapuntal, awareness of the texture, which will bring you to choose with your teacher or by yourself, or by listening to recordings of others, if you want to have ideas, how to manage the three-dimensionalization of the text, because all the elements cannot be even, because on the piano then they will cancel each other, especially faster notes decaying less overwhelm the longer notes, which by holding decay, and if they have a melodic line to convey, then you have to find a way to plan ahead of the articulation, because you cannot create a crescendo on a held note. So you have to plan playing it loud enough so it can last until the release of its tension with the decay that you have to take in account, which is not the musical decay, because you can do it in singing, but on the piano you cannot do a vibrato on a held note. Even if musically the texture can suggest a string quartet, an aria, but it's a piano piece, sonata or whatever, fantasy, prelude, etude. And I observe as a teacher how many times students play phonetically the notes, not necessarily organized in a certain stylistic time frame. What is a suspension and an appoggiatura in Schubert is not in Schumann, and it's not in Brahms, even if they are very alike but not totally, let less in Bach or Haydn. And through Chopin, you can say it's a one large century, because Bach dies 1750, Chopin dies almost 1850. So within, well, Brahms dies in 97, but so within a frame of 100 to 130 years, you go from post-Baroque, as we assign it, to call it, not themselves then, of course, to classical, to romantic, to modern. And how does that translate in the playing, in the choice of the soundscape with cultivated knowledge about the articulations? And is a wet staccato, a mezzo staccato, a legato, a non legato, a mezzo pianissimo? You can have more nuanced dynamics and articulations on top of the tempi, which with the metronome marking indicated, but when you're playing they might vary, and they don't have to be always the ones indicated, because somehow it has to be the coherence of your performance, even if it's few beats a minute difference from what is written. After all, it's an indication, it's not a, well, it is an obligation, because we want to be faithful to the score of the composer's intent. And sometimes the notation filters sort of tricking us to understand the way we want it to be understood, their intent with their notation, or the disposition for the two hands, and when they're close enough, how you can reorganize the order of the two hands so that you can either sing better the melodic line without consecutive fifth finger, with the suspensions of the change of finger substitution, or then take it in the other hand for the accompaniment and liberate fully the five fingers of the melodic line, or the same for the bass line if it is, as it often is, melodic too. So sometimes one can say, yes, the notation is not random, but corresponds to what the composer chose to notate, either because they have amazing technique like Naoumoff, or they have orchestrals or quartet imagination, I was going to say, not only, but almost as if it's a morphing of the fortepiano as a string quartet, an aria of an opera, a mass with choir, or a symphony with orchestra, meaning philharmonic. The ranges, the contrasts, the crescendi subito piano, the crescendi that lead to a forte but not necessarily fortissimo. And when you take in account all the amount of gradual and graduated dynamics that you have to implement in the way you display the sentence to its arrival point, everything comes to the surface of that after the harmonic coating, the pedaling without smearing, the fingering that allows to connect the melodic line when you change the pedal for the harmony without a gap, nor with smearing. And so, in a way, when is a will, there is a way. And sometimes the way is not the easy way. It's sometimes more practical to think I can just use the pedal for the glue and do consecutive fingers for the melodic line. It's possible in good acoustics, but it doesn't work always on drier acoustics. And ultimately you wonder how the composers imagined this when they over-complexified the polyphonic, or at least the multi-layered element of the playing that it's suggested with their notation. And that's why I speak about what I think is the phonetic statement, as if you just pronounce the sounds and you hope that by the time you pronounce them correctly and place them properly, they will convey the sentence that the composer has intended. In other words, you don't have to recompose the piece, you have just to present the piece. But in the process, you involve yourself in the piece. Now, to some, the involvement is not enough, to some is too much. It's difficult to find an objective decision other than taking in account, outside of the context of the time period, that a modulation that sounds lame today sounded audacious back then, whenever the then was. So how do we isolate ourselves or compartment in our musical experience, having heard unresolved dissonances in 21st century atonal or post-tonal music, with inharmonic modulation in Schubert, which is not dissonant, but which is compelling, atmospheric mood setting, when you pass from a flat key to sharp key with a single common tone, and you feel like it's difficult even to put words on it, but you feel that something is going on. And of course, people of the time played music of their time, and we play the music of all of their times, and sometimes we sort of end up, and that we shouldn't, I believe, play them not alike, but with the same tools of our articulation speed, of depressing of the keys. What is a sforzando in Beethoven is not an accent or a wedge, a sforzando in Liszt, and even if it's only a few decades in between, it's already an evolution in the language of expression through the instrument. So I think that semantics are important, but also philosophic understanding of a whole group of centuries of a certain civilization that gave birth to certain genres like the fugue, the suite of dances, the courteous love, the expression of emotion, the anxiety, the excitement, the longing. It's almost archaeological rediscovery, but in real time of today, with instruments of today, with our psychology of today, even if we try to adapt it to what it means then. And it means so many different things to so many people, between the teachers who have their opinions and systems and the students who try to define theirs, and the performers who display theirs, and influence the students, and the competitions tend to standardize them because people want to be liked by different opinions of jury members in numbers, so they abstain rather than involve in a personal statement that might appear eccentric, even if it's only mildly involved, but it's in the eye of the beholder, and therefore if the beholder is the judge, then at different levels you have the publishers who compete among them for who will bring you the edition that is most trustworthy to the original, or originals, or lack of original when there is no facsimile that sometimes we have, especially in Bach, copies of students through centuries. And then you have the competition between the teachers who have opinions. It's not supposed to be this tempo. The cut time is too fast or too short or too slow. And the fermata is supposed to be the double, but not. Or some say yes, and some say the grace note is half of the value. Some say no, it's really short and snappy. So yes, the student is a little bit overwhelmed with the diversity of opinions and convictions, which sometimes the teacher changes mind themselves between lessons almost. But perhaps it's a true grace to accept that, because in a way we are all scholars of the craft that we serve. At the different seasons of our lives, when a piece has been 5 decades in my life and 2 weeks in the student's life, obviously they have a fresher look at it than I do, and I don't tend to stay, try not to stay doctrinary in my experience and memory of the piece from when I discovered it as I grew up older. I'm open to the alterity, and that is very, for me, inspirational, from a student included, or from another colleague or another performer. There's always ways to rethink the paradigm, the way to restate the obvious, or to organize the subtle in a certain flow that brings a certain meaning. And it's so personal, like the timbre of a singer is the touch of a pianist, even if the instruments of the piano are industrially produced. 2 pianists don't sound the same on the same piano with the same piece. Imagine less. Probably a lot of subjectivity prevails over any kind of objectivity, even if there are things objectively to define the playing or understanding or rendering of this or that from this and that. So these reflections boil in my mind to the point to which I say, okay, convince me. But I still have my opinion, and I don't contradict you with it. I just give you my view of it and see how you will deal with it. You can reject it, you can partially adopt it if you find that it fits your musical statement or your handling of the texture with your morphology of hands for the fingerings that lead to the phrasing, articulations, and dynamics, and statement of tempo and breathing that is not only indicated rhythmically but imitates the voice or the instruments, wind instruments, or the bow change. Because on the piano, if not, it's asphyxiating to play all the notes one after the other, grouped by a phrasing, a pulse, an impulse, intervallic gesture. I state many analytical facts, but in fact, intuitively, every student comes to a conclusion without going through the enumeration of the elements, a bit like the, again, phonetic playing versus the analytical playing, a bit like the analogy I gave in the beginning about the mother tongue spoken besides oneself, but very well, until the awareness of the syntax, grammar, and writing and reading in it, where you can write complex or simple thoughts, or dear thoughts, or sincere thoughts, or express yourself in your intimate circle or in public, using common words but with different destination. And same thing in music. You have in tonal music 7/5 perfect ones organized in a scale. By jumping one over, you get to the two tetrachords or steps and full steps. And if you put all semi-steps, you have 12. So it's not infinite combinations, but somehow each restatement of consecutive or non-consecutive tones that somebody else could have used to express themselves even centuries before you convey differently what they have to tell us within the context of their time period. They didn't have often the luxury to think universally how 200 years later people will think of their music with different ears, instruments, and acoustics and recording devices and all, that they couldn't project. They were writing and hearing and playing and enjoying or immersed in the music of their time, like the language, the literature, the knowledge of sciences, and the amount of advancement of chemistry or philosophy, and all these were in parallel with literature and visual arts and storytelling through novels and imagination, through fiction, which reflects the human nature and the experience of the humans on earth during their passage between birth and death. It's fascinating to imagine how much of life's philosophy can be condensed in few notes of music. A whole life in each note. Thank you.